We tend to think of buildings as these passive shelters, just static objects that we live inside. But what if a building, or more specifically its walls, could be an active participant in the environment around it? There's an observation from the work The Memory of Rock, Understanding Rammed Earth by Gokul Salvadi that really frames this whole issue for a particular climate. It says South India doesn't have a cold problem. It has a moisture problem. And what that means is this isn't really about temperature. It's about the constant presence of water in the air. So that reality brings up a pretty fundamental question, doesn't it? How does a building respond to that constant, pervasive humidity? The thing is, most modern structures, well, they're not really equipped for the challenge. And that leads to these persistent problems with mold, rust, and just that general feeling of dampness. To really understand the alternative, we first have to look at the conventional way of doing things. Let's call it the inert wall. So imagine a concrete block house in a humid climate. What does it do about all that moisture? The answer is something very specific and very measurable. It does nothing. Because the material itself is largely inert, the humidity inside the building just ends up mirroring the high humidity outside. The wall is simply a bystander. There's a scientific term for this property, or I guess for this lack of a property. It's non-hygroscopic. It simply describes a material that doesn't actively exchange moisture with the air around it. And this is a key characteristic of materials like concrete. Okay, now let's consider a completely different kind of structure, one that's made from earthen materials. This is the hygroscopic wall. And unlike the inert wall, this one is a very active participant. So hygroscopic, that's the word. It refers to this ability to actively exchange moisture with the air. This isn't a passive or accidental thing. It's a continuous process, and it's driven by fundamental physics. So let's look at how this actually works, the mechanism behind it. When the air is humid, water molecules are literally drawn out of the air, and they bond, the technical term is adsorbed, onto the surfaces of the clay particles within the wall. As the wall takes on this moisture, the humidity in the room drops. Now, when the air becomes drier than the wall, the opposite happens. Those molecules are released back into the air, and the indoor humidity rises. It's this constant process of seeking equilibrium. Now, this moisture buffering capacity, it varies a lot between materials. As you can see here, concrete has a very low capacity. Fired brick is, well, it's moderate. Rammed earth, on the other hand, has a really high capacity to absorb and release moisture. It's actively moderating the indoor environment. And to put this into context, just think about the monsoon season in South India. The external humidity can stay at or above 90% for long stretches of time. But inside a building with an earth wall, that number can be brought down passively to around 65%. Now, this isn't air conditioning, to be clear, but it is a substantial, measurable difference in the quality of the air you're actually living in. There's also a second mechanism at play here, and it's distinct from being hygroscopic. This is the whole concept of the permeable wall. You can think of the wall as a kind of membrane that has two different jobs. First, it has to stop liquid water, rain, from getting in from the outside. That's a given. But at the same time, it should allow water in its gaseous state, water vapor, to pass through from the inside out. And we actually generate a significant amount of moisture just by living in our homes. Everyday things like breathing, cooking, taking a shower, all of these activities release water vapor into the air. So, a vapor-impermeable wall, again, think of concrete, traps all of that moisture we generate inside. It has no way to escape. And this just compounds the humidity problem, effectively sealing you inside with your own moisture output. This is where we make the jump from the physics of building materials to the biology of an indoor environment. And it's here that the health implications become really clear. For example, let's consider dust mites, which are a primary trigger for asthma. Their ability to survive is directly tied to relative humidity. When humidity is over 70%, their populations thrive. But if you can get it below 60%, their populations collapse. That zone right in between is the critical battleground. So by passively moderating humidity and keeping it in that lower range, an earth wall helps to create an indoor environment that naturally suppresses the growth of things like mold and dust mites. This isn't really an argument about subjective comfort, it's an argument about health. And this all brings us to a final, very practical point, the material and the finish you use on the wall's surface. This is a functional decision, not just an aesthetic one. That final layer you put on the wall is absolutely critical.
A traditional lime plaster, for instance, is vapor permeable. It allows the wall to keep doing its job of moisture exchange. A modern cement plaster, however, is vapor impermeable. It effectively seals the wall, which negates the very properties that make it so beneficial in the first place.
So, in the end, a rammed earth wall in a climate like South India's isn't trying to fight the tropics, it's negotiating with them. It's absorbing that excess moisture and then releasing it when the conditions allow for it.
The wall breathes. The idea is to let it.